Ever since the launch of its structure deck, Traptrix has seen much more play among new players. The deck features a relatively simple game plan with plenty of adaptability through various tech choices. As one of my favorite decks in recent years, I wanted to explain the deck for new players, highlight the deck's strengths and weaknesses, and possibly explore some spicy tech choices in the future. I hope you all enjoy the video. Traptrix is mainly a mid-range deck utilizing Xyz monsters, Link monsters, and trap cards. Most of the main deck will consist of level 4 plant or insect monsters and hold trap cards to deal with monsters summoned by your opponent. But the core of the deck is their Link 1 monster, Traptrix Sarah. She only takes one Traptrix monster, she's unaffected by traps. On the resolution activating a Traptrix monster effect, you can set a hold trap from your deck, and on the resolution of any player activating a trap card, you can special summon any Traptrix monster from your deck. To start, Sarah being a Link 1 monster is very powerful, allowing you to turn all your main deck monsters into this card to expand your board. All of the good Traptrix monsters mainly have on-summon effects, which means you trade relatively nicely with hand traps, being able to just make Sarah afterwards. Speaking of hand traps, all the Traptrix extra deck monsters are unaffected by trap cards, which means cards like Infinite Impermanence or more recently Dominus Impulse become less impactful. Finally, both her effects to summon and set from deck are very solid for the strategy. As long as you are actually able to play, you have some really good options at your disposal. But sometimes you don't want to make a crazy end board and just set some traps, and that works too. Most Link 1s in this game are very powerful, and Traptrix Sarah is no exception, with her allowing you to trade very well with hand traps and play well into a grind game. This means, however, keeping her on the board is a main priority when playing into a hand. Now let's talk about some of the main deck Traptrix monsters that you will be turning into Sarah every single game. Let's start with Traptrix Mermelia. She is a level 4 Earth Insect monster with the following effect. On normal, she searches for a hold trap, and on special, she has a mandatory effect to pop an opponent's back row. To start, all Traptrix monsters are unaffected by hold traps, which would really only matter in the mirror match, so don't really worry about that. Moreover, she's the main searcher for the deck, getting you an extender or a form of interruption, which will pair nicely with Sarah. Finally, her mandatory effect to pop a back row is a very important effect, as it's a mandatory effect, which means it has to trigger first. So if you summon this, even if your opponent has no spell or traps, she will trigger and allow you to trigger Sarah to set a trap from the deck. It's a cute way to guarantee a trap set, which I think is a very cool gameplay design for the deck. Otherwise, it's a good way to also out annoying spells or traps like field spells or random sets. Next, we have another searcher for the deck, Traptrix Mantis. She's a level 4 Earth Insect monster that on normal searches for a Traptrix monster, and she has a quick effect to reset set traps. On her own, Mantis is a better starter than Mermelia technically. However, your combo usually is weaker as it locks you into insects and plants early, losing out on generic extra monsters, which we'll talk about later. And her second effect is almost useless other than into targeted destruction and simplified game states such as like Cosmic Cyclone. But still, both these cards are your main starters for the deck. Now we have one of the extenders, Traptrix Arachnocampa. Same stats as the other two, she can summon herself anytime during the main phase while you control a Traptrix monster, and while on the field, your back row is not destroyed once while on field. So in general, this card is a very good extender for the deck, as drawing this card plus one of your starters allows you to play into at least one hand trap. The downside of this effect, unfortunately, is that it does lock you into plants or insects. So as I mentioned before, if you start with Mantis, search Arachnocampa, special Sarah, activate Arachnocampa to summon, you'll be locked for the rest of the turn, which weakens your board to the limited plant and insect card pool. Regardless, this card is an important combo piece for the deck and lets you play into powerful going second cards like Harpy's Feather Duster to protect your back row. And now we have the last two utility cards. First, we have Traptrix Putica. Same stats, but this one is a plant. On normal, she searches for the Int archetype field spell, which we will talk about later, and on special, banishes an opponent's monster. Then, they can special summon a banished monster during their standby phase. So yeah, this card is the most awkward card in the deck in my opinion. Its search effect is whatever, as the field spell doesn't do anything on its own and only lets you continue to play if you have a specific cards in your hand. Furthermore, her special effect is okay. It is monster removal, which this deck struggles with greatly, but it's only temporary and sometimes can hurt you more if they summon a better monster that is banished. The design of this card is that when they summon their monster back, you'll be able to use one of your hold traps to out the monster. But this trade usually isn't worth it, as you use two cards to out only one monster. But it's a lot better against Xyz monsters as they lose their materials, or extra monsters not properly summoned as they cannot be summoned back properly. Finally, for the main deck monsters, we have Traptrix Dionea. Again, same stats, and she's also a plant. On normal, she reborns a Traptrix monster, and non-special, she lets you reset a hold trap from your graveyard for 2 turns. So yeah, this card is pretty straightforward. It's a good card to allow you to gain advantage in his semi-follow-up. You'll mainly use her to reset any discarded hold traps and to easily make a rank 4 going second, which can lead to a blowout card such as Zeus. Overall, both these cards are definitely solid, but now let's talk about the other extra deck monsters. Traptrix Rafflesia is a pretty good card to end on when going first. She is a rank 4 plant, taking any 2 level 4 monsters, and it has the following effect. Again, she's unaffected by trap effects. She makes all other Traptrix monsters protected from targeting and destruction. And when you meet the activation requirement for a trap hole from your deck, you can send it to the graveyard and its effect becomes that of the trap. So this is the best Xyz to end on for the deck. She's unaffected by trap cards, so again, cards like Imperm just won't work on her. But more importantly, she adds valuable protection to your end board, which makes her usually the first threat your opponent will try to deal with when cracking your board. Her main purpose is to protect Sarah and does an excellent job at that. Lastly, being able to essentially activate any hold trap from your deck is very good. And when you're playing specific hold traps, it'd be very hard for your opponent to play around them. Rafflesia will definitely be essential for your end board. Another solid extra deck monster is Traptrix Penguillica. She's also a generic rank 4 plant monster with the following effect. This time she's unaffected by trap effects and unaffected by monsters with the same types as the monsters attached to her. You can detach a material to search for a Traptrix monster, and when your opponent's monster is sent to grave or banished for a card effect, you can attach it to this card. So this card has a lot going for it. Firstly, again, she's generic, which means, depending on your builds, she gets you to engine simply with 2 level 4s, as you could search Arachnacampa, link off into Sarah, then activate Arachnacampa to summon and go full combo. It's a nice way to extend, especially when hand trapped. And then she has the gimmick part about her, where she allows you to essentially take a monster from your opponent and become unaffected by those monsters. This does not come up too often, but in the chance you are in a matchup where her effect is important, you may opt to leave her on board. Some decks struggle to out unaffected monsters, so having this as an option is pretty cool. Usually when you make her, she is unaffected by insect and plant effects, so against the mirror or other decks of the same type, their monsters won't be able to affect her. She's a very solid card for the deck, allowing you to search extenders or follow-up. The other Traptrix Xyz is Traptrix Alamoris. This card is pretty lackluster. Its only function is to really help OTK. Then we have the other link monsters. Traptrix Coolaria allows you to reset used hole traps and special a Traptrix monster from your grave during the end phase. Her effects are way too specific to be impactful in games, and she's a link too, which makes your end board a little bit awkward to make, I'm not gonna lie. Lastly, we have Traptrix Adipus, which gives all Traptrix monsters 1,000 attack and can negate face-up cards on your opponent's field equal to your plant and insects on your board, and you can banish a trap to pop one of them. Out of these 3 cards, this one is the best one, as she's great when trying to OTK your opponent, as well as removing any threats your opponent has. Moving on from the monsters, there are only 2 spells in this deck. As mentioned before, we have the field spell, Trap Trip, Garden. I already commented on this card already, but in summary, this card gives you an extra normal summon, banishes a monster to special a Traptrix from the grave, and gives your monsters battle protection. Again, this card unfortunately doesn't do anything on its own, only helps when you are already playing, and doesn't actually really improve the board that much. And finally, we have Tantalizing Tune, which allows you to discard a trap card or insect or plant level 4 monster for cost to draw 2 cards, and you can shuffle a banished card into your deck. This card is not terrible, letting you put decent cards into your grave while also fixing your hand. However, in Traptrix, this deck is weak on its own, and having cards that are only minus into hand traps like Ash Blossom again isn't too appealing. Most of the in-archetype discards for this card don't do anything immediately too, so unless you play some other traps that you'd have to hard open in order to discard, the discard is actually pretty bad in this deck. Now we'll cover the traps. The whole deck blends with the whole traps, which for the most part all interact with monsters being summoned. The one exception to this, and the reason this deck's combos were enhanced thanks to the structure deck again, is Traptrix Holatea. This is a normal trap with the following effect. You could discard a normal trap for cost to activate Holatea when it is set. It special summons this as a level 4 plant monster, and you can banish it in the grave to reborn a Traptrix monster, which is a quick effect. This card is probably one of the most important pieces in the deck. For starters, it allows you to activate a trap card while going first, which means you can get more value from Sarah turn 1, which you couldn't before. The only catch is you need another trap in hand to discard off the effect, but it shouldn't be a problem as long as you open Mermelia or play high trap ratios. Furthermore, you can summon summon Diana off Sarah to reset any holes discarded, meaning you don't really lose any value. You also get another level 4 body off it, which means after activating Holateo, you'll activate Sarah on a new chain to summon a Traptrix from the deck, and then you'll be able to make any rank 4 you can dream of. Finally, she has the Grave effect to banish and reborn any Traptrix monster, including Link or Xyz monsters. So if you need to immediately deal with a back row, you can use it to reborn Mermelia to out it. If your Sarah gets outed, you can use it to bring her back. Or if your opponent starts with Lightning Storm on a back row, you can reborn Arachnicampa to protect. You see, the reason I love this card's design is it's extremely flexible and allows you to essentially react to what your opponent does to help you play into a hand. It's very nice to have these type of card setups when going up against various decks and to have interaction from your graveyard. Last thing I want to say is that both of this card's effects are once per turn each, so keep that in mind when playing. Also, its graveyard effect does not trigger Sarah, as she only triggers from trap cards, not effects. Regardless, this card is a very necessary card in the deck, and again requires good trap ratios in deck building. Now we have the rest of the hole traps, all 25 in fact, Jesus Christ. Now, there are way too many to analyze all of them, but I'll go over the best ones that you for sure will consider playing. First, we have Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare, which is a monster negate on a special summon monster on the field, and it also destroys it. This card is probably one of the most powerful hole traps that we have at our disposal, being a monster negate and removal. But just remember, it only negates a monster on the field. Most people will know this card has this deck has a monster negate, so something to keep in mind while playing. Another great hole trap is Gravedigger's Trap Hole, which is a negate for a monster activated from the hand, grave, or banish. This card is hands down the best hole trap. It can stop powerful effects activated elsewhere and inflicts damage, which is really good because this deck does struggle to kill. Usually you'll be able to make Rafflesia before your 5th summon, so having this card in your deck to help play around Nibiru is very important for the deck as well. There's also Floodgate Trap Hole, which on summon sets a monster face down, and it cannot change its battle position. This card is matchup dependent. For instance, it's a lot worse in decks that can fuse, such as Branded, as they can just fuse the face down monster away. But again, certain decks setting monsters face down can be pretty impactful, and sometimes in slower games they won't be able to flip the monster up, allowing turns to stall if they commit to one monster. There are also the more classic hole traps which pop/banish monsters on summon with certain attack points, but my favorite one of these is Terrifying Trap Hole Nightmare, which pops a monster with a 2000 or more attack, and if you have a trap in grave, you can also banish a monster in the grave. It's more flexible than the other traps, as most of them have to be activated on summon, and you can banish important graveyard monsters. And the greatest thing about these traps is the ability to choose which one to use off Rafflesia that your opponent really will have a hard time reading. In general, you'll play a few of these hole traps, and you could swap out some in certain matchups. Those are all the in-archetype cards in the Traptrix strategy. Now, there are some important cards that are used in Traptrix, of course, but I will be covering those in separate videos. So for the strengths, I think this deck is obviously this deck is a rogue deck, so the unfamiliarity with other players, especially locals. This deck is a relatively simple game plan, which play very well into blowout cards like Dimensional Shifter, Dimensional Barrier, etc. So those cards don't really are less impactful in a sense. This deck also has access to rank 4 toolbox, such as Baguska, Dweller, and Banshee, which could be good in certain matchups again. The deck has layered interaction, again with Holateo, which is pretty good. And finally, the deck is very flexible, along with the extra deck, which means you can put some cool cards and non-engine in the deck. For the weaknesses, unfortunately, the engine is pretty weak on its own, which means misplays will cost you games compared to meta decks. The deck is pretty weak into Nibiru, Super Poly, and evenly matched specifically. The deck does struggle to break boards without non-engine when going second, so keep that in mind. And the deck struggles to kill your opponent, which means cards like Dimensional Shifter, which while are good and will most likely skip your opponent's turn, you're going to struggle to kill in the follow-up. So just keep that in mind. And finally, the follow-up is pretty subpar unless you play very safe, which sometimes you can't really afford to do. And with that was a Traptrix analysis. I typically categorize Traptrix as a meta call kind of rogue deck, where depending on the format can really shine. For instance, I found a lot of success with this deck during Kashtira format a while back, as the whole cards were great into Kashtira monsters and played well into D-Shifter. The format definitely sways this deck's success, but it's overall a very fun deck, and I hope more people check it out. I missed a lot of cards that people associate with Traptrix, again, which I'll be covering in the future, as well as texts that I've considered. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and have a great rest of your day.